Hi, I'm Nilesh Lathia. I'm going to give you an introductory overview of a project and program I managed many years ago in my financial services career. I was a project and program manager and then a business transformation manager for many years. I was specializing in service-based processes. This is an engagement I did where I enhanced the end-to-end customer journey at a premium service provider as a result of customer survey data and internal metrics mismatch. Some learnings from this case study can be applied to the student experience enhancement work done up and down the country. I've been in academia now for about 10-11 years as a senior lecturer, program leader, as well as a central project manager in a vice chancellor's unit at a UK higher education institution, looking at improving the end-to-end student experience and processes between academic and professional functional areas. A quick intro to the session itself. I hope you can join me through all of it. There are lots of bits dispersed throughout the presentation which apply to higher education improvement and student experience enhancement. So first of all, the student experience journey. I'm going to talk about some work I've done in looking at analysing the student experience at UK universities and higher education in general. I'm going to introduce something called the bow tie concept. Now, this is something I've worked on recently, applied it to student experience analysis, and then going to talk about obviously the case study itself, and I'm going to talk about the approach that was used, and I'm going to introduce a tool called the SIPOC tool, which I hope could be of benefit to yourselves. And then going to talk about designing the vision state, a blueprint for our future operating model to deliver an optimum customer experience. And I'm going to talk about capturing the voice of the customer throughout our design of processes in that optimum state. Then going to introduce the roadmap of change of how we get there and things that we can introduce in the change management application for introducing a improved customer experience. This is a piece of work I started a number of years ago and I've referred back to it a number of times. Please feel free to go through it in more detail as we're limited in this presentation time. But essentially what I did was try to encompass all the various factors, internal and external, that influence the student's experience or the perception of quality in the experience they're having in their in the student journey at university. Now, this comes from a number of different places. It starts from before they come to university, information, their pre-expectations, through to the interactions they have on a day-to-day basis, the role of societies and the student union, the policies and practices that we would have in place at the university, and then external factors, so the changing landscape in society, changing customer trends, factors that the university themselves have little control over. Please do feel free to utilize this in any way you want to. It's my creation, and if it's of any value to anyone watching this presentation, that would make me happy. The bow tie concept comes originally from risk analysis as part of workplace risk management, and it introduces the concept that for any event we have multiple drivers or multiple causes that drive that event occurring, and then multiple consequences. For the student experience, the point I wish to make here is that very often we try to look for a one-to-one-to-one relationship. So one driver for one point of dissatisfaction equals one answer on the NSS or a point of data. And really, it's a much more complicated than that. And I just want to start by introducing that as a concept, but also there's so much further I can take it. One of the points of application are that once we gain an appreciation for that multi-driver relationship to that student dissatisfaction, and then the multiple ways that that then manifests itself, including survey results, then we can start to put into place measures, metrics, and interaction points to gauge the student's experience, to gauge how those factors have affected that particular student, and then we can put in preventative measures in place, capture points, fail-safes, and then we have post-experience recovery opportunities, mitigation opportunities, things that we can do to still turn that student around. And so there's so much more work that goes into this analysis, and I'd love to be able to take you through it. We are limited in our time in this session. So I'm going to give you a bit of context just to set the scene. The customers in question are merchants. So these are establishments that accept American Express or plastic debit and credit cards as a payment type. So these are anywhere which are retailers, e-tailers, cafes, restaurants, bars, hotels, airlines, pretty much anywhere you can use a piece of plastic. So American Express, in comparison to their main competitors, Visa and MasterCard, charge a fee for their services. So charge a fee for the establishment to be able to accept American Express. Now, in return, the customer expects a premium service that reflects and justifies the value for money that they're expecting as a result of paying that fee. So the particular project need itself. We had a situation, we had a declining customer base. What does that mean? Well, we were losing more customers than we were signing. We had two main annual surveys which indicated that customers were highly dissatisfied with their experience with American Express. And this was in stark contrast with our internal measures, our key performance indicators, which indicated that we were performing supposedly actually really well. And here it is, we were performing well against our own internally set targets and metrics, which had evolved over time. So we had here a real conflict that we needed to resolve. Something doesn't add up. We had a new senior vice president enter the fray. He was the most senior person in the region in this part of the business. He had a background for challenging paradigms and for being a visionary leader into change. He also asked for the setup of a new business transformation unit, and I happened to be the first person put in place. Now, of course, one of the first things we did was analyze the data of the annual surveys. We drilled down into the data, cut it in many different ways, looked at it in terms of comparing to our competitors, looked at it region by region in comparison to other areas which may be performing well. We cut it in multiple segment types, so customer types and student types within a university, and we looked at changes year on year and looked at what we had already determined would to be the drivers. Now, we already had this kind of work going on anyway in the organization on an annual basis. So something definitely is not working if there are already action plans every year as a result of these survey results, but we are still having dissatisfied customers. And this is where we had to challenge assumptions and challenge paradigms and say we're going to take a fresh look at this whole situation for ourselves. So we decided that we needed to conduct an end-to-end quality review of all telephone-based activities with customer touchpoints. We wanted to identify process defects. So this is a process improvement or Six Sigma term, but essentially it's the things that we can identify are going wrong with these processes. Identify fundamental drivers of poor quality. So irrespective of individual processes, what are the underlying things that are driving a suboptimal experience for our customers through their time with us? We then were going to develop a new structural operating model which would address all of these and give us supreme or optimal customer experience touchpoints. We obviously then needed to recommend a roadmap for change to provide that optimization across the European region to ensure that customer engagement satisfaction was effective and sustainable. The approach that was used includes some things that are common in all successful change programs. Having clearly articulated objectives, having a defined vision state or a blueprint of the future organization you want to be or the change you want to achieve, having clear roles and responsibilities. This program change happened in a very aggressive timeline, so we had a dedicated project team. The specific approach in this program was to gather all data, information and analysis available through the process maps, scorecards, service level agreements and existing customer feedback analysis. So process maps, this organization was very mature in terms of having lots of process maps documented for pretty much everything it did in terms of operations. Scorecards are a performance measurement and management tool where you have metrics assigned to teams, processes, departments, and these are used to monitor performance on an ongoing basis, whether they are weekly, monthly, etc. And this is what teams would be goaled to achieve. SIPOCs. So a SIPOC is a tool I'm going to introduce in more detail next. Hopefully it's going to be of some benefit to you. I then led a number of process deep dive sessions, which included the process owner, so the managerial level person responsible to the organization for that process, as well as people from operations. So the people at the coalface interacting with the customers on a day-to-day basis, capturing that first-hand feedback. Another notable thing I want to highlight is that I determined we needed to cast our net further afield in terms of benchmarking. There were resources and accesses to groups available to us where we could learn from the best servicing practice globally from different industries. And I think that's something that changed as a culture in the organization as a result of this program. So the SIPOC tool is a one-page snapshot of a process. Because this change program covered 21 key processes across 9 European markets, I needed a method through which we can gain an overview of everything and how everything fits together. This is a Six Sigma tool I learned back 13, 14 years ago. So essentially, you summarize the process in 3 to 5 steps. You then identify what are the inputs and the outputs from that process and to that process. You then identify who are the suppliers, be it internal or external, and the customers, be it internal or external, to and for those inputs and outputs. The process owner is the person who is accountable to the organization for what the purpose of this process is. So it's the person who will make the managerial, tactical level decisions on what the targets should be, who should be goaled on doing what, and the performance ultimately of this process and its provision of service or interaction to that customer. This is a very busy diagram with a lot of jargon and company-specific detail. The only point I want to make from this is the opportunity to take the customer journey and then splay it out, which is what we did. I categorized it into the phases of the customer journey as well. So from acquisition, onboarding, through to day-to-day relationship management, through to attrition retrieval. So we could do the same for the student experience, of course, starting all the way from admissions through to orientation and induction, through to interactions with the course, with the administration, with the academics, with societies, through to graduation and becoming an alumni. And just very simply, a visual is very effective in managing a change program. For this purpose, it was to show everyone, all stakeholders, what activities are in scope. This is a very internal document containing a lot of jargon. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but what it does do is represent a number of drivers of poor quality for the customer experience. So essentially what we did was looked at the activities in scope and looked at who actually interacts with the customer. Who are the operators? So we found that over the preceding 10-15 years, an approach had been taken at the highest level to break the functional areas of the European business down and allocate them to vice presidents. Those vice presidents then were goaled with things such as efficiency, cost, and also customer experience. But the directors under them had made decisions over the decade in terms of renegotiating service level agreements and at times outsourcing the interaction or the operational responsibility of those processes to third parties, offshoring and outsourcing. So what had happened is we ended up with a fragmented, inconsistent experience for the customer. So those decisions had been made within those silos without an appreciation for the disconnect it would create for the customer. Those vendors didn't have access to the customer history of interaction with other departments, and they didn't have the ability to transfer a customer over or to communicate directly themselves with customer operatives in other departments. So this was something we found was broken, that unless we'd had a transformational review, wouldn't be identified or understood. And this was one of the key reasons why the scorecard metrics all were positive, because they were looking at their respective processes, but the customer experience overall was seen to be suboptimal. So we realized very early on that we needed a transformational change. This is in an organization that has a very strong culture of continuous improvement and always be changing, always be enhancing, even in the areas that this program was tasked to address. So what happens? Well, changes happen incrementally over time in a continuous improvement approach. But there are also other times when a big, dramatic, transformational change needs to happen. Why? Well, we have our direction that we want to go into. We have our vision or our strategic objective as our target. And as we are doing our continuous improvement and we are making our changes year on year, and we think we are aligning to our target. However, what happens is over time we have drift. Drift as a result of the external environment changing, customer preferences changing, the competitive environment changing, and essentially where we think we needed to go 5 years ago is no longer the case. And our target is moved, and we need to conduct a big step change to get us back to where we need to. I like to think of transformational change in terms of people, process, and infrastructure. Infrastructure in terms of the systems that we use, the tools that people have, the inputs and outputs into those systems, who puts those inputs in, who gets those outputs, what's the frequency, what's the format. The systems and how the different systems in the organizations talk to each other. The processes. So are the processes still fit for purpose? What are we actually trying to do? What are we measuring? Do we have non-value adding steps in that process? And do we need to change things in terms of people? So when you change infrastructure and process, you're going to need to change people anyway. But does everyone have the updated skills that they need? Do they have the right knowledge? Are people reporting to the right people? And are they goaled to achieve the right things? So these are all things that need to be looked at in combination as they have an interdependent relationship on one another. Best practice in transformational change suggests that we need to define the future state. So create a vision of the organization we need to be to provide the optimal service experience to our customers. We then need to do a gap analysis compared to our current state, our as is, and the organization we want to be. A very beautiful but busy diagram. I'm not going to go through everything it represents, but what it is a blueprint of our vision state. I'm going to talk a bit about the principles of excellent practice which are represented within this illustration. Firstly, we identified what are the core objectives of the processes. What are they ultimately looking to achieve when successful? We grouped all these processes together because they were there to service the customer, to help the customer solve their problems. All these processes ultimately are there to build our customer base. So sales, account retention, business development processes. Here, all these processes interact with any end user who calls us. Here, all these processes interact with the key decision maker, the owner of that business, or the person who decides yes or no to stay with American Express. Another thing that we identified was that at the very top, the senior level, all these processes should sit under one business owner. Same with these. Why? So that they can have an overview of everything that happens at a tactical or strategic level to those processes to ensure that no decisions are made in the coming years that could contrast or contradict what ultimately we're trying to achieve with these as a group. The other thing we did was we identified which processes are core commodities or differentiators. So core commodities are those processes which we say there aren't really many opportunities to deepen the relationship. There's nothing you can do that's so excellent that the customer is going to have a memorable experience. So these are transactional interactions primarily. The other ones are the differentiators. So the differentiators are the ones where the customer is going to identify this experience as a memorable one. These are the moments of truth where you can distinguish yourselves against your competitors. And these are the ones where we say that we need our best skilled people, and for people who are better at sales, who are better at problem solving, and so we can put our resources where they can be the most effective. There's other things here as well in terms of segmenting the customer and providing multiple channels for the customer to choose how they're contacted or how they contact the organization. Here we have the end-to-end review of our infrastructure. So essentially the principles here are that everyone should have access to the customer's history. Everyone should have access to our product offering, and that everyone should be able to interact with anyone else. So the system needs to drive this interconnectivity so that we don't have the inconsistent experiences that customers have had in the past. We then have our underlying pillars of success. So these are things that we should have introduced into the organization irrespective of which process we are talking about. So these are things such as having an e-servicing platform. So this is for high volume, low complexity issues that the customer can do themselves if they so choose. Other things are having metrics and having customer feedback across all of our processes. Now, unfortunately, I can't go into too much detail here right now, but we identified what are the voice of the customer capture points in every process as soon as possible after this moment of truth occurs. And what are the measures that we need to put into place, and how do we need to monitor the performance against those measures to ensure we are driving an optimal customer experience, and then we are in a position to be able to do something if we are failing against those targets. Other things are employee engagement. So one of the things we decided was that we are going to restructure and that we are going to change reporting lines so that all these processes reported up to this senior business leader. You can imagine the changes involved in that. But another thing was to have employees individually gold through the annual performance development plan, individually gold not only on that process performance but ultimately in the bigger picture, the underlying objective, so that you're not just putting the phone down on the customers. They're saying we've done what we can here. You're looking to go that step extra to make sure that customer doesn't have a disconnected experience against what we are looking to achieve. Once we'd identified and had approved the changes we wanted to put in place, we decided on an implementation plan that was multi-generational. So essentially breaking down into the short term, medium term and long term in how we're going to introduce this roadmap of change. Having things implemented in the short term can be beneficial in many different ways. First of all, it allows you to gauge resistance to change and get feedback on the change journey itself. Secondly, it helps with buying in stakeholders because they see visible change happening. It's not something that we're talking about 2-3 years down the line. Things are starting to happen. Also, it allows you to put in enablers for the longer term changes. So if you can take the long term change and break it down and turn one part of it into a project itself, this is great because you can gauge feedback and make course corrections along the way as well. Some things I want to share that worked really well and we can learn from in future engagements. So having a very senior person as the sponsor helps to open a lot of doors, increase engagement and responsiveness from people when they're requested to provide information or participate in something. There are challenges, of course, with somebody who's very senior because it's difficult to get in their diary, it's difficult to get them to be hands-on, so you may not get the input as often as you need, for example. But there are tactics. Some things that I did were get them to walk through the first 5 minutes of certain kickoff workshops or certain sessions, and this would just help to maintain the prominence of this work in stakeholders' perspectives. Having everyone available or utilizing everyone to get their input is also very valuable. So those people who manage the relationship or interact with the customer on a day-to-day basis, but are not necessarily managerial level people, can be an incredible source of information to gain feedback on what the customers are actually saying and what they think is not working. Very often they may not feel heard and they may not feel that their input is actually received. So this can help to break a lot of barriers in terms of where the pockets of resistance to change often manifest themselves. I want to thank you so much for watching this presentation to the end if you have. And I just want to say, if you have any questions or have any queries about anything that I covered so far, even if you just want to have an informal discussion about anything that you're doing in your organization and any input I can provide, my associates can provide. We have many years of experience in introducing change in organizations and all have higher education experience. Please don't hesitate to get in touch. I'd be delighted to speak with you. Thank you.